Welcome to part 2 of modeling a simple flashlight for beginners. This is where we left off in part 1, and we are going to continue now. And the first thing I'd like to do is to come back up here and turn off the cavity shader. We'll just go back to looking at it normally, and we'll click that back on a little bit later on. So I'm pressing Shift and middle mouse button to move my sort of scene up a little bit, and I'm going to press Z and wireframe. You can do that up here as well. Okay, go from solid to wireframe like that as well. I'd like to work on this lower section right now, and as we can see, and we've all used flashlights before, I assume, this piece down here is actually a separate piece that could be screwed on or off and put the batteries in. So I'd like to actually make it a separate piece. So let's think about how we would do this. Right now, come back to here, this is all a solid piece. And in order to separate it, we're going to have to do something with the mesh and break it apart. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm in object mode right now. I can hit tab to go into edit mode, or I can do it up here. And to split this, we're going to have to put an edge in here. And the way we add an edge is to go Control R, click, and pull down. Now you're going to notice that my line is straight across, and this one is curved like this. Okay, and that's just because of the angle at which this photograph is taken. All right, so I'm not going to worry about that. But I now have another edge that goes all the way around my mesh, my model. We've separated it out. I'll come back into solid view. Press 1 to look from the front and Alt-A to deselect. So there's a new edge in here, and that gives us the ability to select just this bottom stuff here. Now, we have to decide how we're going to do this. There's a couple of different ways to do it. First of all, if I was to come up here and press face selection, you can see I can select these faces. Alt-A to deselect. If I pressed B to box select and I dragged a rectangle up here, I could select those faces there. But when I come around to the back again, they're not selected back there. Alt-A to deselect. Press 1 to look in face selection. If I do go into wireframe mode, and I press B, and I box select, and I include these, and I sort of bring my box up to there, I get the whole thing. Let's go back into solid view. So I could select all those there, and then do something to separate them out, and I'll show you that. Another thing I could do, deselect. If I select this bottom face, if I want to select all the way up to here, with this bottom one selected, I can start pressing Control plus, and that will expand my selection. Control plus again, Control plus, Control plus, keep going until I get to there. Now if I went one more, Control plus, I would get up to there, and that's too much. So I could then go Control minus. So I can select all of those faces that way. All right, so that's two ways to select, and there are other ways, but we'll leave it at that. So now what we want to do is we want to separate this out and make it a separate piece. The way that you do that is press P, and you'll get the separate dialog box, and we will separate by this first one. Choose this one. Now if I go tab and go back into object mode and deselect, I can select that piece or that piece, and we do have a separate piece of our model right there. Now I'm going to select this piece and hide it, and the way you hide part of your object is to press H to hide. If we look at just this, you'll see that it's like paper thin. All right, it doesn't look like a piece of sort of thick metal. I'll go Alt-H to bring that other piece back. Let's hide the reference again. And now I will select this one and hide it. And look at the bottom. Again, you can see just, you know, one polygon thick, like a piece of paper. And that doesn't look like real metal. And so what I like to do when I have two separate pieces that appear to join is I'm going to, let's focus just on this. I can either hide this stuff, all of that, or I can select this piece and go Shift-H. All right, that hides everything else. Alt-H to come back. If I wanted to see just this, I could either H and hide that, Alt-H, or I can just select this piece and go Shift-H, and that'll focus just on that. What I'd like to do is give this some thickness, but I don't need to give it all thickness. What I'm going to do is come into edit mode by pressing tab, and I want to select this edge here. So I'm going to press 2 for edge selection, Shift and Alt and click, and I've selected just that edge. I would like to extrude this in a little bit, and I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to press E and S and pull it in just a little bit. Now, if you just saw it there, you would say, oh, it's got some thickness to it. Let's go back into object mode, and you would see that. I'm going to Alt-H and bring back the other stuff, and I'm going to focus on this piece. Shift-H. I'm going to do the same thing. In edge selection, Shift, Alt, and click the top edge. There, got the whole thing. E and S. Just come in a little bit, just pulling my mouse in. Now if I go Alt-H and bring it back, now it looks a little bit like this has got some thickness, this has got some thickness, and the two pieces kind of screw in together to each other. And I think it looks a little bit more realistic. Let's go back to our reference. Look from the front. Let's select maybe just that one and hide it. So we've got that. Now what we need to do is these lines here. So let's look at this and think about what these are, what we could do. All right, there's sort of long, thin rectangles. So we could start with a cube. We're certainly not going to use a cylinder or a circle. We could start with a cube, or we could start with a plane. My 3D cursor is still right down here, and that means anything that I create will come in right there. So let's try a plane. Let's go Shift-A, Mesh, Plane, and I can't really see anything because it's laying this way. So I'm going to rotate this. I like to rotate and scale in edit mode. So I'm going to go into edit mode by pressing tab, and I'm going to rotate around the X, RX 90. There, now we can see it. I'm also going to, let's see what we want to do. Let's pull it out in front. Press 1, and let's bring back the bottom and go into wireframe. All right, so now what we want to do is we want to scale this plane down so that it's the same size as these pieces. So I'm going to press S. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to pull this up so that it lines up right here with the top of one of these bars. I'm in edge selection number 2, so I can click on this bottom edge, pull it up to the bottom of this. I just pressed A to select it. Let's scale this, but only in the X direction so that we can get the width of this. So let's go S and then X. Scale in the X and pull your mouse in. And I get a piece. And I'm going to make it approximately the thickness. Okay, cool. So I've got that. We're going to need to give this a little bit of thickness as I pan around here. I'll go back into solid view. We're going to need to give this a bit of thickness. So let's extrude it in the Y direction. Let's press E and then drag forwards or backwards, doesn't really matter, Let's try dragging forwards and say, well, maybe it's about that thick. Okay, so we're creating that piece. There it is. Okay, I'm going to press 3 to look from the side, and I'm going to pull this so that it seems like it's on my model and maybe slightly into my model. I don't want it hovering out in space. I want it sort of into my model. I'm going to press Z and solid to look at that. Now I don't want a very sharp angled rectangle, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bevel this piece right here. With it selected, I'm going to come over to the modifier tab. I'm going to choose bevel, and I'll go ahead and I'll bring it up to 3, and that's going to give me 3 edges in here and bevel it nicely. But the amount I'm going to bring to 0.0, try 2. May not look like it does anything. I'll try angle and shade smooth. And it's looking a little weird, but what we're going to do is we're going to come in and I'm going to delete the back face, but I'm not going to do that yet. What I think I'm also going to do is Control R and click and drag this out a little bit. Now, maybe I'm going to adjust this a bit. There, I'll do it like that. One thing that we can do to improve the shading, I don't know if you can see that it might look a little weird. The first thing we should do is we should come up here, click here under the viewpoint overlays, and come down to where it says geometry face orientation and click that and make sure that everything looks blue. Come back, uncheck it. That means our polys are all facing the right direction. More on that later if we need to. But what I'm going to do, because I put the bevel modifier on and the shading looks a little funny to me, is I'm going to add another modifier called weighted normal, and I'm going to come down to here, object data properties, this triangle, and click normals auto smooth, and you'll notice it's changed, and that's going to look somewhat better. Now let me see if I can fix this up. I'll come back, find my bevel, let's go for 3. All right, that looks okay there. So we have that piece sitting there. Now, as far as what I just did over here with adding this weighted normal and auto smooth, it's just something that you will often do when you use the bevel modifier, and you just get used to doing it. Let's save. Now, what we're going to do is I want to have this go all the way around the bottom. So let's select this piece and hold shift and click the bottom, and then let's press the slash key. Now that's on your keyboard underneath the question mark. All right, just press the slash and that will isolate both of those. If you press slash again, they'll both come back. You could also do shift H like we did before, just to focus on those. What I want to do is I want to replicate these or duplicate these all around the circumference of this, somewhat circular object, and create a whole bunch of them. And we do that with the spin tool. In order to use the spin tool, though, you need to have a back on this piece of geometry. It has to be enclosed, and it is right now. Later on, I'm going to probably delete the back face to just reduce the number of polygons. But for now, I need that. We also need the 3D cursor right in the middle of the object that we want to spin around. And it is right now. It's in the middle of this circular piece, so that's fine. So what we want to do is we want to select our object and make sure that the origin of this object is the 3D cursor so that we could essentially rotate around. So I'm going to choose Object, Set the Origin to the 3D cursor, and it already was there. So if I was to go RZ, rotate around the Z axis, coming straight up, RZ, watch this. It stays nicely around my object. It rotates around the origin point. I'll escape from that. What I want is I also want the reference image to look from the front. And I'm going to press wireframe. I just want to get a sense of how many of these I want. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to spin this object. I've got it selected. I've got my origin at the 3D cursor. You need to go into edit mode for that and A to select it. And the spin tool is down here. Okay, I'm going to click that. I'm going to open the spin dialog box down here. And I want to rotate around the Z. So I'm going to press 1. And I'm going to zero these out. Make sure those are zeroed out. Okay, so now I'm spinning around the Z axis. I want my angle to be 360. Now you can start seeing what's going on. And the steps will be the number of my objects. I'm going to look from the front. And I'm just going to pull this until these line up. I can hold shift. And of course I'm adding a lot of polys, and I don't have to have the exact number in the diagram. I can go to Z solid view if I want to see it a little bit better. And that looks pretty good to me, that number. So I'm going to minimize that, and I'm going to come back to here to this move icon. I'm done with the spin tool. Go into object mode, stop, save before I go any further. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to select just those pieces I've added. I'm going to press the slash key or shift H just to isolate them, deselect. I want to get rid of some of these faces because I've added a lot of geometry, and if we were to come up here, click on the viewport overlays and click on statistics, you could get a sense of how many objects I've got, how many vertices, edges, faces, triangles. If you look just at the vertices, I've got 12,768. So I've added quite a lot of geometry. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to press number 3 for face selection. It's all selected right now, but I'm just going to click on 1. I'm going to select all of these interior faces. I'm holding down shift and I'm coming around. It might take a little while. There are other selection methods, but I am just going to go around and do this, and it may take a couple minutes. X faces. I brought the vertices down a good amount. Okay, Alt H, bring everything back, but hide the reference. With that, then I'm going to go into edit mode. Make sure that you're on median point. Sometimes you'll do something in individual origins like I did in the previous video, and you might have left it there. You open your file up again and you forget. So median point is the default. And with all those selected, I'm just going to press S to scale. My 3D cursor is right in the middle. I'm going to hold down shift. I'm just going to pull them in just a little bit. Just like that. It might just look a little bit better. So I've got those there. And now what I'm going to do is I think I will go ahead and turn on the cavity. And we can see our work so far. So we've got those on there and we are doing just fine. Now it's questionable if I want to pull those in a little bit more. I'm going to press S, hold down shift, pull them in. And they may start to disappear a little bit, so I'm probably going to leave it like that. If you want to hide the grid temporarily and everything else, you can just click here and click here, And now you can just see your model. And this is what we've got. So it's looking somewhat like the diagram that we have, the reference image, and we've done the bottom part of the flashlight. What's left for us to do is to work on the top, and we'll do that in the next video.